Welcome to Let's Learn Together, and welcome to The Debate. Imagine staring at a 10-page, densely packed academic text, knowing your entire academic future hinges on the next 60 minutes.
Oh, it is deeply terrifying. Just a completely paralyzing scenario.
Right, exactly. So, do you actually read the text, or do you interrogate it? Today, we are questioning whether the survival tactics we teach students for English exams are, well, actually destroying their ability to comprehend the language.
Yeah, it's a huge question.
It is. We are looking at a very specific methodology drawn from our source material for preparing for a comprehensive English final exam. This methodology proposes breaking this massive, overwhelming subject of English down into 4 distinct, highly managed pillars, which are vocabulary, grammar, reading, and writing. So the central question we are exploring today is, this is a highly systematized, structured approach to English study, the most effective way to demonstrate understanding, or does it risk reducing complex language comprehension to mechanical gamification and cognitive shortcuts?
And I think that's the core of it.
I represent the position that highly structured, targeted strategies like outlining and treating reading as a targeted search are optimal, absolutely necessary tools for transforming an overwhelming, massive material into manageable, predictable success.
And I represent the perspective that, while these techniques undeniably soothe anxiety, over-systematizing the study process risks turning genuine language comprehension into a superficial treasure hunt, bypassing the deep, organic learning that the subject actually demands.
Well, to expand on my position, I want to emphasize the psychological and, honestly, the practical brilliance of taking something that causes genuine panic and fracturing it into those 4 simple parts. I mean, if you are listening to this and you've ever frozen up staring at a blank exam booklet, you know exactly how paralyzing cognitive overload can be.
Oh, absolutely. The blank page freeze is real.
Right. When a student is staring at a massive academic hurdle, panic is their primary enemy, not a lack of intelligence. The source material advocates for taking control through defined steps, and I believe this is fundamentally correct because it addresses human psychology.
Okay, but
Just to finish the thought, by utilizing small, manageable daily habits, like reviewing exactly 10 vocabulary words a day, rather than cramming 100 the night before, and relying on structured frameworks, like a strict 3 to 5 minute essay outline, you provide the brain with a necessary roadmap.
right, a roadmap.
Exactly. This methodology guarantees clarity over chaos. It transforms an unpredictable intellectual exercise into a safe, bounded process, leading directly to the confidence and clear, rested mind that is so crucial for allowing a student to actually show what they know.
Look, I completely acknowledge the appeal of reducing that anxiety, and I appreciate that we are centering the student's psychological safety here. It is deeply comforting to feel that you have a formula for success.
It is.
But I argue that the tactics proposed here might actually bypass the very deep learning they are meant to measure. The text uses a fascinating metaphor, framing grammar as learning the rules of a game, and suggesting that during reading comprehension, the student should act as a mini treasure hunter scanning for answers.
Which sounds highly effective to me.
Well, while these mechanical approaches might optimize test performance in the short term, they fundamentally alter the purpose of reading and writing. They prioritize mechanical efficiency over true engagement with the text. I mean, we have to ask ourselves what we lose when we turn literature and language into a simple data extraction exercise.
That is exactly where the tension lies, and I think it's a perfect place to begin our deeper exploration. Let's look at that first pillar, reading comprehension. The material suggests a very specific, and I'll admit, highly debated cognitive strategy.
Yes, reading the questions first.
Right, reading the questions first, before you even start reading the actual text.
It is highly debated, and I take significant issue with it. I come at it from a different way entirely. When you read the questions first, you are completely altering your neurological relationship with the text.
How so?
Well, the material praises this by saying the mind acts like a mini treasure hunter, where key details and main ideas naturally pop out because you know what to look for. But let's think about how the brain processes narrative versus how it processes a search query.
Okay.
If you are scanning a text just to find key details and specific answers, You aren't actually reading the text. You are merely interrogating it for data points. Comprehension requires understanding the holistic flow of an argument, the subtleties of tone, and, the broader context in which details are embedded.
Sure, in a perfect world.
But if your brain is solely acting as a search engine for predetermined questions, you are essentially wearing blinders. You might find the treasure, the specific date, or the specific name, but you completely miss the landscape. It defeats the very purpose of comprehension.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Aren't we letting perfect be the enemy of the good here? We have to consider the environment in which this reading is taking place.
A timed exam.
Exactly. This is not a leisurely Sunday afternoon curled up with a novel, right? It is a high-stakes, timed assessment. Without this specific focus, a student is just staring at a wall of text, which often leads to what cognitive scientists call working memory overload. But doesn't reading a list of complex questions beforehand add more to the working memory load before they've even seen the text?
Actually, it acts as a filter. Think of it like triage in a crowded emergency room. You don't try to solve every problem at once. You identify exactly what you need to look for to stabilize the situation.
The material also suggests underlining key words and writing a 1- or 2-word summary in the margin next to each paragraph. That takes 2 seconds, but it creates a roadmap. It prevents cognitive fatigue. It gives the reading a real purpose and keeps the brain anchored in a highly stressful environment, moving the student from a passive, overwhelmed state into an active, controlled state.
That's a compelling argument for anxiety management, I'll give you that. But have you considered the intellectual cost of that map? A 1- or 2-word summary in the margin is an incredible reduction of complex thought.
Well, it's a shorthand.
But if a student is taught that the goal of reading is merely to extract a 2-word summary to satisfy a multiple-choice question, we are conditioning their neural pathways to ignore nuance. They learn to discard the transitional phrases, the subordinate clauses, the very things that give language its depth and meaning.
But it saves time.
Yes, it saves time. But at what cost to their actual literacy? What happens when a question asks for the overarching theme or the author's unstated bias, but the student has only been hunting for explicit keywords?
The cost is managed by the fact that they are actually able to process the text, rather than freezing up entirely. It is an assuring technique. It lifts the weight off their shoulders, allowing their cognitive resources to be used for analytical thinking rather than managing panic.
I'm just not sure it translates.
Well, your point about nuance raises a fascinating question about how this mindset translates. Because extracting data from a text is only half the battle. If a student's brain is trained to read in fragments, what happens to their ability to generate a cohesive, organic thought of their own when they sit down to write an essay?
Exactly.
This is where I think the friction between structure and organic thought really intensifies.
It does. And this brings us right into the second pillar, which is essay writing and grammar. This is where the limitations of these rigid frameworks become even more glaring to me.
I have to push back there, because I think the material provides a phenomenal safeguard against the chaos of timed writing. It explicitly states that quality is much more important than length.
Okay, true.
To achieve this, it advocates spending just 3 to 5 minutes making a quick outline before writing a single sentence. And it's very specific: an introduction with a 1-sentence thesis, body paragraphs giving exactly 2 or 3 strong reasons or examples, and a conclusion summarizing the main point.
Right, the classic formula.
Yeah. The genius of this 3-minute outline isn't just about forcing an essay format. It's about offloading working memory. By externalizing the structure onto the paper, the brain frees up processing power to focus entirely on vocabulary and syntax. It prevents the writer from wandering off topic, ensuring they don't get stuck midway through.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Let's look at the time economy and the rigidity being praised here. If you spend 3 to 5 minutes outlining this exact formula, thesis, 2 or 3 reasons, conclusion, and you must save the last 5 minutes for a final review to catch spelling and punctuation mistakes, you are compressing the actual act of thinking and writing into a very tight artificial window.
Well, it's a timed exam. The window's already tight.
But more importantly, does a rigid thesis plus 2 reasons format actually produce a good essay?
Or does it merely produce a compliant, formulaic one? We are teaching students to fit their complex thoughts into a predetermined artificial box. Life, and certainly high-level academic discourse, rarely fits neatly into 2 or 3 perfectly symmetrical reasons.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Think of the rigid essay structure not as a prison, but as a trellis for a climbing plant.
A trellis?
Yes, the trellis is rigid and artificial, certainly, but without it, the vine collapses on the ground into a tangled, formless mess. In the highly pressurized environment of a time setting, the structure actually allows the complex thoughts to grow upward and be seen. It ensures that the core components of argumentation are present.
I see the metaphor, but
And speaking of foundational rules, the material addresses grammar with a very similar, assuring philosophy. It frames grammar as learning the rules of a game, where recognizing the pattern makes it manageable. It suggests reading sentences out loud while practicing, relying on the ear to catch awkward or choppy phrases to indicate a necessary grammar tweak.
which, again, sounds wonderful and soothing, but is deeply problematic when you look at the mechanics of language acquisition. Treating grammar merely as the rules of a game trivializes the logic of language, and the advice to just read a sentence out loud to see if it sounds awkward or choppy, that relies entirely on the student already possessing an internalized, flawless ear for standard academic English.
Can you clarify why you think that auditory check is so flawed? For many students, hearing the words is the only way they catch a missing verb or a clunky transition.
Because what sounds fine to the ear in casual conversation is often grammatically incorrect in an academic essay. Take complex structural issues like the subjunctive mood, where we explore hypothetical situations.
Right.
Heck, fails completely. Saying "if I was" sounds perfectly normal to modern ears because we hear it all the time in everyday life. But academically, it should be "if I were the author."
I see.
Or consider dangling modifiers or subtle tense shifts. Our brains naturally autocorrect these things when we speak. Relying on an auditory check provides a comforting illusion of mastery, not actual mastery. It's a shortcut that skips the hard work of understanding the underlying mechanics of why a sentence functions the way it does.
I see why you think that. But I must defend the auditory check, not as a replacement for knowing the rules, but as an incredibly practical, physiologically empowering habit. Let's look at the neuroscience of reading your own work.
Okay.
When you read silently, your brain anticipates what you meant to say and literally autocorrects typos and missing words on the page. You become blind to your own errors.
That is true.
By vocalizing the text, you engage an entirely different sensory pathway. You force the motor cortex and Broca's area to process the syntax. It physically slows the student down. It forces them to actually look at the words they wrote, not the words they think they wrote. This ties directly into the advice to save the last 5 minutes of the exam for a quick final review. That final sweep catches the missing punctuation and repeated words because the student is finally seeing the text objectively. It is about taking back control.
I will grant you that engaging a different sensory pathway disrupts that visual autocorrect. That is a fair neurological point. But it still assumes the student knows how to fix the error once they hear it.
And getting them to that point of knowledge requires cognitive scaffolding, which must be grounded in biological and psychological reality. This brings us to a fascinating part of the material, the micro habits and the underlying psychology of preparation that make these mechanical outputs possible in the first place.
Ah, the holistic well-being aspect. This is where I think the material makes some very interesting claims about how we construct memory and manage stress.
Absolutely. I mean, the mechanics of the exam mean nothing if the student's mind and body aren't prepared to execute them. The material champions highly manageable micro-habits to build this foundation over time. For vocabulary, it explicitly advises against the traditional method of cramming 100 words the night before. Instead, it suggests reviewing exactly 10 words a day.
Right.
But the real brilliance is in how it suggests reviewing them, creating personal flashcards.
Wait, let me stop you there. Can you give me an example of how that actually looks in practice? According to the material?
Sure, instead of writing out dry, rote dictionary definitions, the student writes a fun or personal sentence on the back of the flashcard.
The specific example used in the text is taking the word joyful and writing, Mark's bright smile when he gets coffee is joyful.
Okay, I see.
By connecting a new vocabulary word to a real, positive memory or a funny thought, the brain holds on to it much better. This psychological anchoring, combined with physical self-care like a good night's sleep for a faster brain, a light, healthy breakfast, drinking water, and taking deep breaths before opening the booklet, creates the ultimate environment for success. It completely reframes the exam from a biological threat into a manageable task.
Well, I will certainly concede the value of physical well-being. A rested brain, adequate hydration, and deep breathing are biologically necessary for optimal cognitive function. There is no debating the fact that a tired, dehydrated mind struggles with executive function, the very part of the brain required to execute your 3-minute essay outline.
Right, exactly.
However, I maintain a strong intellectual skepticism about the memory tricks proposed, specifically those personal flashcards.
How can anchoring a complex word to a positive personal memory be anything but beneficial? It literally builds a bridge for the brain.
Because memory is highly context-dependent or state-dependent. Let's look closely at the exact example provided, anchoring the word joyful to a highly specific, informal personal memory about a friend getting coffee. While that undeniably makes the flashcard memorable in the short term, it creates a rigid, closed-loop associative link in the brain. The neural pathway built is incredibly narrow. The danger is that the student might struggle to recognize or properly interpret that same word when it appears in the vastly different, formal, and often abstract context of a 19th century literature passage or a dense informational text.
I'm not sure it's that rigid.
Well, by personalizing the vocabulary so specifically, you might limit the student's ability to generalize the word's application. They are learning the word in a closed semantic network, rather than understanding its flexible, objective utility across different, complex linguistic landscapes.
I hear your concern about context, but aren't we demanding immediate perfection from a process that is supposed to be gradual?
Are we?
Well, the initial personal connection is simply the hook. Once the brain has retained the word via the personal memory, it is no longer a strange alien concept. When they encounter it in a 19th century text, the familiarity of the word, even if initially anchored to a coffee shop memory, reduces the cognitive friction of the reading passage. They might have to adjust their understanding of the context, but the word itself doesn't cause them to stumble and lose their flow. It's a stepping stone.
A stepping stone, perhaps, but we must be careful that students don't stop on the stone and think they've crossed a river. This is my overarching concern with this entire methodology.
Which is?
If their entire preparation is built on reducing friction, reading questions first so they don't have to absorb the whole text, writing formulaic essays on a trellis so they don't have to struggle with organic structure, and using personal memory tricks so they don't have to wrestle with abstract definitions, they might pass the exam. They might feel very calm doing it. But have they truly mastered the English language? Or have they merely mastered the art of test taking?
I believe they have mastered the translation of their knowledge into the specific format required by the assessment, which is a vital, real-world skill in itself. To synthesize my position as we draw this discussion to a close, the methodology we've explored today is fundamentally about empowerment and psychological safety. The English language is vast, complex, and deeply nuanced. An exam covering vocabulary, grammar, reading, and writing all at once is objectively intimidating. By implementing structure-creating roadmaps with one-word margin notes, utilizing 3 to 5 minute essay outlines to offload working memory, learning 10 words a day through personal connection, and ensuring physical preparation with a rested brain, we give students practical, actionable tools.
Right.
These techniques turn a terrifying, monolithic wall of text into a predictable, manageable, and even enjoyable process. It is about creating a safe, cognitive environment where a student can actually demonstrate what they know without being derailed by panic or cognitive overload.
And to synthesize my perspective, I agree that managing panic is essential, and these techniques undeniably soothe anxiety by offering a sense of control. The physical preparation, grounding the intellect in a well-cared-for body, is incredibly sound advice.
Good to hear we agree on that.
However, we must remain sharply aware of the intellectual limitations inherent in this kind of systematization. By gamifying grammar and turning reading comprehension into a literal treasure hunt for preselected data points, we risk fostering a highly superficial engagement with the material. A structured outline might guarantee compliance, but it doesn't guarantee profound thought.
True.
We have to be honest about the fact that while these methodologies are highly efficient for navigating the artificial environment of a timed exam, they do not necessarily foster the deep, organic, and nuanced language mastery that is the true goal of an education in English. We risk training excellent data extractors but poor readers.
Both of these lenses offer immense value. Looking at study habits through the lens of psychological safety and systemic efficiency is just as crucial as examining them through the lens of deep, organic, intellectual engagement. The tension between preparing efficiently for an assessment and cultivating true, profound comprehension is a fascinating balance. It is a tightrope that every student, and indeed every educator, must navigate daily.
It absolutely is. Understanding the mechanics of how we learn, how our memory actually functions across different contexts, and being willing to critique the very strategies that make us feel comfortable, well, it only strengthens our ultimate grasp of the subject.
There is always more to explore when we examine our own learning methodologies. Whether you find yourself building strict outlines and margin roadmaps to manage the chaos, or whether you advocate for a more holistic, unguided immersion into the text, the way we approach the wall of text tells us a great deal about how our minds work under pressure. The next time you find yourself standing at the bottom of that massive wall, consider not just how quickly you can scale it using a trellis, but what you are actually seeing on your way up. Thank you for thinking deeply with us today.